Well, there is no mechanism to enforce this latest truce in Sudan, but the US and Saudi Arabia are monitoring its implementation. It's a short-term pause focused on relieving the dire humanitarian situation, which mediators hope to be able to extend. More than 1 million people have been displaced since fighting broke out 6 weeks ago.
According to estimates of the Doctors' Union, more than 860 civilians have been killed, including more than 190 children, with another 3,500 civilians injured. Many are missing. Over 1 million have been displaced. More than 840,000 have sought shelter in safer parts of the country, while another 250,000 or so have crossed Sudanese borders. And we remain firmly committed to 4 immediate priorities. First, achieving a stable ceasefire with a monitoring mechanism. Second, preventing the escalation or ethnicization of the conflict. Third, protection of civilians and provision of humanitarian relief. And fourth, preparing for when the time is ripe, a fresh political process with the participation of a broad array of civil and political actors, including women.
Well, Arise East Africa correspondent Mark Bichachi has been monitoring developments in the region, and he joins me now live from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Good to see you, Mark. So we've seen, of course, many ceasefires in the past, which have all failed. How is this one holding in your assessment?
It is a mixed bag, largely because on the first part is that we've still had reports of gunfire and artillery fire within the city. We've seen the last hospital that seemed to be holding up, the last bastion of healthcare, has also shut down in the last 2 weeks. So then there are still complaints that the RSF especially is still occupying civilian residences, making it difficult. But it is a better situation than has been prevalent over the last 1 week. It is definitely a slowdown in violence. But more importantly, it is the first sign that these two parties were actually willing to discuss and sign a peace truce for the 7 days together. And even more, the threat by the United States that any breach to this particular peaceful moment, it will be treated by sanctions on the individuals who will break that truce. So the monitoring is also helping a bit, and we're also seeing the United States take a firmer stance to ensure that this ceasefire actually holds.
Well, actually, tell us more about that mechanism that you mentioned there that is in place this time to monitor the ceasefire, which includes, I understand, both parties and representatives from the 2 mediators, the US and Saudi Arabia.
Yes, indeed. The process is being monitored, one by both parties monitoring each other and basically ensuring that the other is not becoming an aggressor during the period of ceasefire. Number 2, the United States has sent representatives, as has Saudi Arabia, to ensure that this ceasefire is followed. Now, this is critical because over half of the population of Sudan is now in need of some form of aid. And this is a humanitarian window upon which the brokers of this particular ceasefire hope to be able to reach the people who badly need this kind of help. The other question is, will we see the fighting move away from residential areas, move away from key installations such as hospitals, water plants, and power distribution centers? So these are the things they'll be monitoring for, to see also whether these troops will actually allow for the flow of electricity, access to hospitals, and the flow of water to come back to many parts of the city of Khartoum.
Well, yes, and that was going to be my next question. So perhaps you could expand a bit on that. What will be the key priorities of the humanitarian agencies? Because, I mean, the situation is pretty dreadful for those trapped by the fighting.
Indeed. The first priority, especially in areas in Darfur and areas in Khartoum, is to make sure that there is a window, one, for people to be able to escape, because some, especially in Darfur, have been unable to move because the city has basically, their city has basically been surrounded. So there is the movement of refugees, but there's also the movement of much needed food and medical aid that is coming into the country. The other priorities are ensuring that the key installations, key civilian installations, by that I mean electric installations, we're talking about water installations, and hospitals and other amenities that the public needs to access are demilitarized, and so that the people can be able to access them. Those are the key priority areas in this particular ceasefire, and that will also mean that should the violence also begin, it would be expected that violence will not affect hospitals and other key installations upon which the Sudanese people rely.
And of course, Mark, as we talked there, I mean, it's one thing to, have all these pronouncements and all these monitoring mechanisms and all the rest of it to try and ensure that the ceasefire holds. But what is the sense that you get from talking to all the other parties to this, the neighbors, I mean, Kenya, where you are? Is there hope that this calm will last long enough to allow essential humanitarian aid to be delivered? I mean, what's the mood amongst the humanitarian agencies?
So the humanitarian agencies have been camped mostly at Port Sudan, trying to reach out to the people. The United States has released $240 billion to the region to help neighboring countries cope with the refugees that are coming, but also to ensure that aid goes into the nation of Sudan. Now, beyond that, the Kenyan president has said on record that I think it is quite unfair that the army, the two fighting generals, are bombing infrastructure, roads and bridges and infrastructure that will be needed for a peaceful Sudan. So the region is on tenterhooks. They are hoping that this ceasefire holds, but the amount of impatience that is beginning to grow with the two generals, especially given that their stances towards each other are simply driven by power. It is not an ideological war. And to take a statement from the weekend that said, it's either victory or martyrdom, such statements are not being taken lightly. So generals are likely to alienate themselves further and alienate the nation of Sudan further. The hope, though, is these peace talks are not just about returning humanitarian access to Sudanese people, but also a return to the path towards democracy and civilian rule, which really is the silver bullet for this situation.
Well, absolutely. Thank you so much, Mark. Mark Bichachi is Arise East Africa correspondent. He was talking to me there from Nairobi.